as I've been walking with a number of leaders recently, there's so many that have been facing significant challenges. They've been facing these withholding of promises. It's delays, financial restrictions, loss of revenue. I mean, I know there's inflation. I know that there's the recession or potential recession. I know that there's political dynamics. There's things that are going on. Gas prices are $6, $7 a gallon. But as we're walking through this, I believe there's an invitation for us as believers to experience the word of the Lord in the situation that will change the perspective of what we're seeing in the natural, and to begin to give us the word of the Lord, which is powerful, which is authoritative, to be able to change the situation. But first, we have to believe it. First, we have to have a change of perspective. First, we have to be able to see and hear what God is saying. And the only way I know how to do that is to come up higher. What I mean by that is, as you're in the midst of the storm, as you're in the midst of the battle, as you're in the midst of the swirl that's going on, that you learn to withdraw and to be able to say, God, I got to remember what you're saying and doing. The way I do it is this. I go back and I recall the testimonies. I go back and recall what he has said, what he has done in the past. David did it all the time. He remembered testimonies and said, God, I saw you deliver the Israelites out of Egypt. I saw you spread out the sea so that they could walk through it. I saw you provide manna in the desert. And then he goes, why so downcast, oh my soul? Put your hope in God. And today, some of us need to recall what God has already done. Go back to the testimonies. If you can't remember your own, go back to the Bible testimonies. God, you healed that woman you from the blood issue. You raised Lazarus from the dead. You split the waters to the sea. God, you spoke through Elisha to the woman with a jar of oil and said, go get more jars and pour out in the midst of a famine. You prophesied and said, by tomorrow, there'll be more than you know what to do with. God, when you spoke, things changed. And that's what I believe of your character and nature. So when we start to speak it, all of a sudden something begins to rise up with us. We begin to recognize the truth of who God is, the character, the nature of what God has done and who he is and how he operates, contrary to what we're experiencing. We, as believers, have to have a different perspective. We have to have a different awareness of what is happening, because we will be bound to the natural circumstances. We'll be bound to the situations that are in front of us, and we will restrict what we can experience because we are limiting, and we're limiting what God can do because of our beliefs. We're agreeing with the natural fears, the natural restrictions that then empower that into the situation. And I believe God is calling us, you and I as leaders, right now, first and foremost, to lean into him, to say, God, I've got to see who you are. I got to remember what you've done and who you are so that I can see clearly about what you're saying and doing in this situation. When we come up to a different perspective, we're not living according to the natural, we're living according to what God is saying so that we can agree with it, believe it, and empower it into that situation. And I believe there's an answer for everything that we're walking through right now. That's the nature of the kingdom. That's the nature of who God is. I'm not pep talking you. I'm encouraging you, inspiring you to be aware that God has a solution right now. And the way we access it is by first remembering what he's done, shifting our heart back to the truth of who he is, and then begin to ask him, God, what are you saying about this situation? Because this is the nature of who you are. And when we do that, we begin to see possibilities that we didn't see before. We begin to see obstacles that are in front of us, that they're just paper thin, that it's just a facade of fear, that it's not the thing that will determine what God will do. But it may be the reality of what we're facing, but it does not determine the finality. But it begins to allow us to see beyond the mountains, to begin to say, God, what do you see? And what are you saying? What are you saying to declare? Like Jesus, in the midst of a storm, he spoke to the storm, peace be still. One time he walked on water in the midst of the storm. So we need to be aware of, God, what are you saying and doing? Because he wasn't thrown off by the circumstances. He wasn't thrown off because of the obstacles or the negativity or the results. He was aware of who his Father was. He was aware of the authority he carried, and he was aware of what the Father was doing in the midst of it. That's what I want to encourage you. In the midst of financial holdup, in the midst of lack of sales, in the midst of staff leaving, in the midst of circumstances that seem like they're so contrary to what you know is truth, you lean into what he has said. You lean into who he is, and you lean into what he's saying right now. And as you do that, I believe that we will experience the promises of God fulfilled in your life and in the people's lives around you.